The Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Saddam Hussein, what do they all have in common? American weapons, American training, American money. Every single one of them was armed, funded, or empowered by the United States before they became the enemy. The pattern is so consistent, it cannot be an accident. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is documented history, exposed in congressional hearings, declassified CIA files, and Pentagon reports that most Americans will never read. And here's what makes it truly disturbing. Same playbook every time. The United States identifies a geopolitical threat. It finds a local proxy willing to fight. It arms that proxy to the teeth. The proxy wins or destabilizes the region. Then that proxy turns those same weapons against America. And the cycle starts again. New war, new funding, new enemies. Today, we're going to trace this pattern from the Cold War to the war on terror. We're going to follow the money, name the players, and expose the machine that profits every single time. Because once you see this pattern, you can never unsee it. The Cold War seed. To understand how America manufactures its own enemies, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to September 11th, not to the Gulf War, to 1947, the Cold War. The moment the United States decided that any enemy of communism was a friend of America. No questions asked. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Washington adopted this as gospel, and it worked for a while. The CIA began funneling weapons and money to anti-Soviet forces across the globe. Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, the Middle East. The logic was simple. If they fight the Soviets, arm them. If they overthrow a leftist government, support them. It didn't matter if they were dictators, warlords, or extremists. Democracy was never the goal. Containment was. And in the pursuit of containment, the United States planted seeds that would grow into the very threats it now fights. This wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. A strategy that prioritized short-term geopolitical wins over long-term consequences. Short-term thinking. And those consequences were about to arrive with devastating force. But to see the full picture, we need to look at one country in particular. Arming Afghanistan. December 1979. The Soviet Union invades Afghanistan, and the United States sees an opportunity, not to help the Afghan people, to bleed the Soviets. Within months, the CIA launched Operation Cyclone, one of the longest and most expensive covert operations in American history. Billions of dollars funneled to fighters the CIA barely knew. Through Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI, the United States armed the Mujahideen, Stinger missiles, AK-47s, explosives, training camps. The money flowed like a river. At its peak, the CIA was spending over $600 million a year on this single operation. And who were these fighters? Some were local Afghans defending their homeland, but others were foreign jihadists recruited from across the Muslim world. Among them was a young Saudi millionaire named Osama bin Laden. Washington didn't care who they were arming. As long as they killed Soviets, they were freedom fighters. These gentlemen are the moral equivalents of America's founding fathers. The Soviets eventually withdrew in 1989. America celebrated. Mission accomplished. But nobody asked the obvious question. What happens to all those weapons and all those radicalized fighters when the war is over? That answer was about to become America's worst nightmare. Birth of Al-Qaeda. When the Soviets left Afghanistan, the United States packed up and went home too. They left behind a shattered country. No reconstruction, no stability plan, no follow-through. Just a power vacuum and thousands of battle-hardened fighters with American weapons and nowhere to point them. Abandoned. From the ashes of the Mujahideen, something far more dangerous emerged. Osama bin Laden took those networks, those contacts, those supply chains that the CIA had helped build, and he forged them into a new organization. Al-Qaeda, the base. If this is opening your eyes to the pattern, hit like and subscribe to keep questioning everything, because what comes next connects all the dots. The fighters America trained to resist Soviet occupation now had a new mission. They turned their rage toward the nation that had armed them and then abandoned them. The 1993 World Trade Center bombing, the 1998 embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, the USS Cole in 2000, funded, trained, abandoned, attacked. Each attack was a warning. Each warning was ignored. And then came September 11th, 2001. Nearly 3,000 Americans died that day, killed by an organization that was born in the very camps the CIA helped create. The monster was homegrown, and nobody wanted to admit it. But Afghanistan was only one theater. The same playbook was running simultaneously in another country. Saddam, friend first. Before Saddam Hussein was America's most wanted dictator, he was America's most useful ally. In the 1980s, Iraq went to war with Iran, and Washington picked a side. Not because Saddam was a good man. Everyone knew he wasn't. But because Iran, after the 1979 revolution, had become enemy number one. So the enemy of America's enemy became America's friend. The United States provided Saddam with intelligence weapons and diplomatic cover. The Reagan administration sent Donald Rumsfeld to Baghdad in 1983 to shake Saddam's hand. The CIA shared satellite intelligence so Iraq could target Iranian troops. American companies sold Saddam chemical weapon precursors. When Saddam used chemical weapons against the Kurds in Halabja, killing 5,000 civilians in a single day, Washington's response was muted. A few diplomatic statements. No sanctions, no consequences, because Saddam was still useful. He may be a bastard, but he's our bastard. Then in 1990, Saddam invaded Kuwait. Suddenly, the ally became the enemy. The same man America had armed was now America's target. Operation Desert Storm was launched with weapons designed to destroy the very military the United States had helped build. Armed, then attacked. But the pattern didn't stop with Saddam. It was about to repeat in an even darker way. The Iraq trap. After September 11th, the United States invaded Afghanistan. That made some sense. Al-Qaeda was based there. The Taliban harbored them. But then came the pivot that changed everything. Washington turned its sights on Iraq. The justification, weapons of mass destruction. Weapons that were never found, because they never existed. The intelligence was fabricated. The evidence was cherry-picked. Colin Powell stood before the United Nations holding a vial of fake anthrax, making the case for war based on sources that later proved to be liars. The entire justification for invasion was built on lies. In March 2003, America invaded Iraq. Saddam fell within weeks. Mission accomplished, they said again. But what followed was chaos. The decision to disband the entire Iraqi military put hundreds of thousands of trained soldiers on the street with no jobs, no income, and no loyalty to the new government. Catastrophe. Think about that. Trained fighters with military expertise, suddenly unemployed and angry. Where do you think they went? They didn't just go home. A disbanded army doesn't disappear, it transforms. Many of those former Iraqi officers would soon form the backbone of something the world had never seen before. And that brings us to the darkest chapter of this pattern, the rise of ISIS. ISIS didn't appear from nowhere. It was built on the wreckage of every American intervention that came before it. The former Iraqi military officers, the radicalized prisoners from Abu Ghraib and Camp Bakr, the power vacuum left by regime change. All of it converged into the most brutal terrorist organization the world had ever seen. Iraq, Syria, chaos, ISIS. Camp Bakr, an American detention facility in Iraq, is where many future ISIS leaders met each other for the first time. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the future self-declared caliph, was held there. The prisons became networking events for extremists. We created the perfect incubator for radicalization. And then there's Syria. When civil war erupted in 2011, the United States began arming so-called moderate rebels to fight Bashar al-Assad. Once again, weapons flowed into a conflict zone with minimal oversight. Billions in weapons vanished into the chaos of the Syrian battlefield. Those weapons didn't stay with the moderates. They ended up in the hands of extremists, including ISIS. The same pattern: arm a proxy, lose control, fight the monster you created. But it wasn't just the Middle East. This playbook has roots in another part of the world entirely. Latin America's scars. While the Middle East gets most of the attention, the same pattern played out for decades in America's own backyard. Latin America. Guatemala, 1954. The CIA overthrew the democratically elected president Jacobo Arbenz because he threatened the profits of the United Fruit Company. They installed a military dictatorship that led to a civil war lasting 36 years and 200,000 deaths. Democracy overthrown to protect a banana company. Chile, 1973. The CIA backed the coup against Salvador Allende, helping install Augusto Pinochet, a dictator who tortured and murdered thousands of his own people. Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Panama, the list goes on. 1. Guatemala, 1954, CIA coup for corporate profits. 2. Chile, 1973, Pinochet installed with CIA backing. 3. Nicaragua, 1980, Contras funded illegally. 4. Panama, 1989, Noriega, former CIA asset, invaded. In each case, the United States armed, funded, or installed leaders who became brutal dictators. And in each case, the instability that followed created waves of migration, poverty, and anti-American sentiment that persist to this day. Coups, dictators, consequences. The refugees showing up at the southern border aren't random. They're running from the consequences of decades of American intervention. But there's an even deeper question we need to ask. Who actually profits from all of this? Who profits? Follow the money. It always leads to the same place. In 1961, President Dwight Eisenhower gave his farewell address. A five-star general, a man who led the Allied forces in World War II, and his final warning to America was not about the Soviets. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. Nobody listened. Since that speech, the United States has spent over $15 trillion on defense. The top 5 defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics, have seen their stock prices climb year after year. Every war is a revenue stream. Every conflict is a quarterly earnings boost. War is not a failure of policy, it is the policy. When America arms a proxy and that proxy becomes an enemy, what happens? A new war, new contracts, new weapons sales. The cycle isn't a bug. It's the business model. Senators who vote for war receive millions in campaign donations from defense contractors. Retired generals become board members at weapons companies. The revolving door spins and spins, and the American taxpayer funds it all while being told it's for national security. Profit over people. But the financial incentive alone doesn't explain everything. There's a strategic logic too, and it's just as disturbing. Chaos by design. There's a theory in geopolitics called controlled chaos. The idea is simple and terrifying. A dominant power doesn't need stability everywhere. It needs stability for itself and instability for its rivals. A broken region cannot challenge the empire that broke it. Think about it. A stable, unified Middle East with control over its own oil would be a formidable power. A fractured Middle East, divided by sectarian conflict, dependent on American weapons, and unable to form a coherent bloc. That's a Middle East that can be managed. Instability is not the failure of strategy, it is the strategy. Libya had the highest standard of living in Africa before NATO intervened in 2011. Today it has open-air slave markets. Iraq was a functioning state, however brutal. Today it's a patchwork of militias. Syria was stable. Now it's in ruins. Libya, Iraq, Syria destroyed. Each intervention was sold as liberation. Each resulted in fragmentation. And in each fragmented state, new extremist groups emerged, giving justification for the next intervention. The war on terror creates the terror that justifies the war. It's a perpetual motion machine. Intervention breeds instability. Instability breeds extremism. Extremism justifies more intervention. And the defense contractors cash the checks at every stage. But what does this mean for the future? The next enemy. If you understand the pattern, you can predict what comes next. Right now, the United States is arming proxy forces around the world. In Ukraine, in Taiwan's neighborhood, in various African nations. The question isn't whether these alliances serve American interests today. Of course they do. The question is what happens in 10, 20, 30 years when those interests shift. Today's ally is tomorrow's target, and the weapons never expire. The Mujahideen became Al-Qaeda. Saddam was a partner before he was a target. Noriega was CIA before he was invaded. The pattern is not a theory. It is a documented, repeatable cycle. Inevitable. And here's the most uncomfortable truth of all. This pattern doesn't continue because of incompetence. It continues because it works for the people who benefit from it. Not a bug, a feature. The politicians get re-elected. The contractors get paid. The generals get promoted. The media gets ratings. The only people who lose are the civilians on both sides, the American soldiers sent to fight, the families in countries torn apart, the taxpayers funding the whole machine without even knowing it. War is a racket. It always has been. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many. The question isn't whether the pattern will repeat. The question is whether enough people will see it to demand it stops. So here's where we are. From the Cold War to Afghanistan, from Saddam to ISIS, from Latin American coups to the chaos of Libya and Syria, the pattern is undeniable. America arms its future enemies, not once, not twice, over and over and over again. The cycle continues, because the people who profit never face the consequences. This isn't about hating America. This is about demanding better. About recognizing that a foreign policy built on short-term proxy wars and long-term blowback is not keeping anyone safe. It's manufacturing the very threats it claims to protect against. See the pattern, break it. The Mujahideen became Al-Qaeda. Saddam was an ally until he wasn't. The weapons always come home. The blowback always arrives. The question is whether you'll keep accepting the official story or start following the money. If you made it this far, comment blowback cycle if you'll never look at foreign policy the same way again. Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about? The truth is out there. You just have to follow the money. Subscribe if you want to keep digging.